Creation and fall. In the beginning of everything, even before the conception of time, God existed as the only being from eternity. In a majestic act, he decided to create the heavens and the earth, giving rise to all existence. This magnificent work reflected his unmatched sovereignty and creativity. The crown of his creation came with the formation of man, molded in his own image. This unique creature received the breath of life directly from God, becoming a living, conscious being endowed with free will. Harmony reigned in the early days, and man enjoyed divine proximity in Eden. However, even in this paradise, humanity faced its greatest trial. Adam and Eve, the first humans, succumbed to the subtle temptation of the serpent. The forbidden fruit, offered with deceitful promises, became the catalyst for the fall. Disobedience introduced sin into the world, irreversibly altering the relationship between God and his children. By biting the forbidden fruit, Adam and Eve experienced the bitter reality of estrangement from God. Their actions resulted not only in their spiritual downfall, but also in the inheritance of sin for all humanity. The initial purity was replaced by the awareness of good and evil, and Eden was left behind, guarded by cherubim. This foundational episode, recorded in the pages of the Bible, illustrates human frailty. The event of creation and fall resonates throughout the scriptures, demonstrating the need for redemption and pointing to the promise of a Savior who would restore the lost communion between God and humanity. The trajectory of humanity after Adam and Eve's fall reveals the complexity of human nature and God's relentless pursuit of restoration. The ancient world was filled with intrigues and challenges, with societies forming and establishing themselves in distinct ways. However, people's hearts strayed from morality and integrity, succumbing to temptations and deviating from the path of righteousness. The book of Genesis transports us to this period where humanity, despite divine guidance, found itself in a state of moral decay. Relationships were marked by betrayal, greed, and an unrestrained pursuit of power. In Genesis 6, verses 1 to 3, we read, "As men began to multiply on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves from all they chose. Then the Lord said, 'My spirit will not contend with man forever, for he is mortal. His days will be 120 years. Some interpretations suggest that the sons of God refers to angels who, disobeying the natural order, descended to earth and possessed the women, creating a hybrid race of giants, described by some as Nephilim. This act is considered the last straw that led God to send the flood. On the other hand, it's important to understand that Genesis 6 is contextualized with chapters 4 and 5, where in chapter 4 we see the lineage of Cain, while in chapter 5 we see that of Seth, Adam's third son. Thus, the term daughters of men seems to refer to the women descended from Cain's wicked lineage. Seth's lineage represents those who remained faithful to the Creator, named as the sons of God. The word giant, describing the offspring of these races, originally comes from the King James translation and can also be translated as fallen or tyrants. Regardless of these interpretations, the figure of Noah emerges in this turbulent context. This man is presented in the Bible as a figure of extraordinary justice and righteousness, standing out amidst the corruption that permeated his society. Noah was the son of Lamech and grandson of Methuselah. Along with his wife, Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The introduction of Noah in the biblical narrative is marked by characteristics that distinguish him as unique. The book of Genesis describes him as righteous among his contemporaries and blameless in his generation. These words resonate as a divine commendation of Noah's integrity, making him a central figure amidst the moral decay of the ancient world. While society around him indulged in corrupt practices and distanced itself from divine paths, Noah remained steadfast in his devotion to God and his blameless conduct. Faced with the growing corruption and wickedness of the antediluvian society, God, in his sovereignty and justice, decided to purify the earth through the flood. The biblical account in Genesis reveals God's decision to intervene in the face of moral degeneration that had reached a critical point. At that moment, God looked at Noah and found in him a light of righteousness and justice. God's call to Noah was an act of grace and divine choice. In his wisdom, God decided not only to destroy creation, but to offer an opportunity for preservation and renewal through Noah. The biblical text highlights that Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord, indicating that his relationship with God was the determining factor for his choice. God communicated his call to Noah with detailed instructions on the construction of the ark. The complexity of the project and the meticulous details reflect the seriousness of the divine purpose. Noah, as a man of unwavering faith, accepted the monumental task with submission and obedience. The ark, according to the biblical account in Genesis 6, was 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. A cubit, an ancient unit of measurement, no longer in use today, was about 45 centimeters. So the ark's dimensions would be equivalent to 137 meters long, 22 meters wide, and 13 meters high, covering an area of over 43,000 square meters. The Bible describes the ark as having 3 stories, an opening for lighting, and specific compartments for animals of all species. God, in his omniscience, revealed to Noah the exact specifications for the ark. Each detail was communicated clearly, reflecting the divine foreknowledge guiding the project. The choice of cypress wood and waterproofing with pitch were integral parts of the divine plan, ensuring durability and preservation. The work continued, with Noah and his family dedicating themselves tirelessly to the construction of the ark. The disbelief of the society around him did not shake him. On the contrary, it intensified his determination to obey the divine voice. It's not certain how long Noah took to build the ark. The apocryphal book of Jasher, in chapter 5, states that Noah took 5 years to build it. This seems a reasonable time, during which he also organized the planting and storage of food to be consumed for a year by Noah's family and the animals. On board the ark, an additional miracle unfolded as peaceful coexistence among different species of animals was established. The biblical account emphasizes not only the animals' obedience to divine instructions, but also the peace and harmony that reigned within the vessel, defying natural expectations and once again highlighting God's providential hand. The onset of the flood is described as the floodgates of heaven being opened, with heavenly waters falling incessantly on the earth. The biblical description highlights that all the springs of the great deep were broken, and the windows of heaven were opened. Torrential rains began to transform the familiar landscape into an unrecognizable one, setting the stage for the flood that would engulf all creation. As the waters advanced relentlessly, swallowing plains, mountains, and everything in their path, the biblical narrative emphasizes the universality of the flood. The Bible makes it clear that all the highest mountains under the entire heavens were covered. Rain fell incessantly for 40 days and 40 nights, plunging the earth into a state of constant flux. The ark, built by Noah, floated on this vast ocean of turbulent waters, representing not just physical shelter, but a symbol of divine salvation amidst the flood. The narrative highlights God's providence that guided the ark through the waters, protecting Noah and his family. The biblical text describes Noah, after 40 long days of the flood, deciding to send the dove to investigate the conditions outside the ark. The dove, a serene messenger of life, flew over the turbulent waters, indicating that the Earth's surface was not yet ready to welcome life again. However, the narrative deepens when the dove returns to the ark with an olive leaf in its beak. Noah interpreted the dove's gesture as confirmation of the Earth's restoration, and he waited patiently and gratefully for the right moment to open the ark's window. The Bible highlights that Noah waited another 7 days before reopening the window, indicating his caution and desire to confirm the ground's stability before disembarking. God's covenant with Noah after the flood represents a pivotal point in the biblical narrative, marking the transition from destruction to the promise of a new era. The account in the book of Genesis reveals the compassionate and redemptive nature of the Creator, who, after the water's catastrophe, establishes a lasting covenant with Noah and all creation. The narrative begins with Noah and his family emerging from the ark, witnessing a transformed earth after the flood. In this post-catastrophic scene, Noah offers sacrifices to the Lord as an expression of gratitude and devotion. It is in this context that God, in His mercy, establishes a covenant with Noah, promising never to destroy all life on earth through a flood again. The symbolism of the rainbow emerges as a crucial element in this divine covenant. God declares that the rainbow will be the visible sign of this promise, a constant reminder of the covenant between Him and all creation. The consequences of the flood, narrated in the book of Genesis, transcend the cataclysmic event itself, extending to changes in the earth and humanity. The waters receded, revealing an altered landscape and regions that were previously submerged. The account mentions the formation of mountains and valleys, suggesting a geological reconfiguration caused by the flood's titanic forces. The consequences for humanity are also noteworthy. The Bible describes that Noah and his family, the only survivors of the flood, became the progenitors of all post-flood humanity. The genealogies that unfold after the event trace the lines of future nations and peoples, delineating the human diversity that emerged from Noah's family. Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their respective wives, are presented as the parents of the different lineages that spread across the earth. Each of these lineages gave rise to different ethnic groups and nations, contributing to human diversity. Shem was blessed by Noah and given the responsibility to repopulate the region that would later be known as the Middle East, often associated with Semitic peoples, including Hebrews and Arabs. Japheth was tasked with repopulating the regions that would encompass Europe and parts of Asia. Genesis chapter 9 verse 27 states, "May God enlarge Japheth's territory." Meanwhile, Ham was assigned to repopulate the region that would later be associated with Africa. Ham's descendants are often linked to African peoples. This division of responsibilities was symbolically represented by Noah's blessing to his sons. Each was destined to play a role in repopulating the earth, contributing to the ethnic and cultural diversity that would emerge in subsequent eras. It is worth recalling the episodes of disobedience associated with Ham's lineage. One day, Noah planted a vineyard, and upon becoming drunk with wine, he lay naked inside his tent. His youngest son, Ham, saw his father's nakedness, and instead of covering him or maintaining discretion, went to tell his older brothers, Shem and Japheth. Shem and Japheth, unlike Ham, showed respect for their father's nakedness. They entered the tent backward, carrying a cloak to cover Noah without looking at him. When Noah awoke and learned what had happened, he pronounced a curse on Ham's lineage while blessing the lineages of Shem and Japheth. This genealogy serves as a foundation for subsequent biblical narratives, connecting the stories of the great patriarchs, such as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to post-flood humanity. The story of the Tower of Babel is found in the book of Genesis, specifically in verses 1 to 9 of chapter 11. This narrative begins after the flood, when humanity began to multiply and spread across the earth. Although the Bible mentions the Tower of Babel, its exact location is uncertain. Various theories and hypotheses suggest it could have been located in Mesopotamia, ancient Babylon, or another region. At the beginning of the story, all the Earth's inhabitants spoke the same language and had a common ambitious purpose. They decided to build a city with a tower that reached the heavens. This tower, known as the Tower of Babel, was seen as a symbol of human power and achievement. The main motivation behind this endeavor was clear. They wanted to demonstrate power and authority and also avoid being scattered over the face of the earth. Given the context of the biblical narrative that occurs after Noah's flood, it is possible that the builders of the Tower of Babel also had a persistent fear of another flood. They might have believed that building a high tower that reached the heavens was a way to protect themselves against the return of a catastrophic flood. This motivation was linked to the preservation of life and the survival of the community in an environment where the flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers was a real threat. However, the desire for protection against a new flood demonstrated disbelief in God, as after the floods, the Lord God made it clear, never again will all life be cut off by the waters of a flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth. Another theory suggests that the Tower of Babel could also have been built as a defensive military structure. In ancient Mesopotamia, city-states often faced threats of invasions from neighboring peoples or pagan tribes, as they were called at the time. The construction of a high tower could have served as a strategic observation post to detect approaching enemies and as a fortress to protect against attack. Thus, the tower would have had both practical and symbolic functions, representing the city's defense against external threats. However, the tower's builders believed they could reach the heavens through their own skills and efforts, thus challenging God's authority and will. This symbolized human rebellion against the Creator. It is worth remembering that in Genesis chapter 9, God blessed Noah and his sons, telling them, "Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth." God had commanded humanity to spread across the earth after the flood, but the tower's builders disobeyed this order. Their disobedience represented disbelief and a lack of submission to divine will, preferring to follow their own path over divine guidance. Led by a man named Nimrod, whose charisma and persuasive power were immeasurable, the builders had grand ambitions. This ambition led to the desire to build a tower ever higher, eventually reaching the sky. A descendant of Noah, Nimrod is mentioned in the Bible as a notable king of great power on earth. According to Jewish interpretations, Nimrod was responsible for the first commission to build the Tower of Babel. Nimrod was known as a tyrannical leader who sought to turn people away from worshipping God. In this context, the idea of building the tower arose as an attempt to challenge God. It is important to note that Babel was the capital of the rich and powerful Babylon, where the construction of pyramid-shaped temples was a common practice among the Babylonians, Sumerians, and Assyrians. However, God, disappointed, observed what was happening and decided to intervene in the construction. He would not allow humanity to follow its own path, challenging his authority and, especially, disobeying his instructions. Then God, in a divine act, decided to confuse the languages of all the tower's builders. Suddenly, each builder began to speak and understand a different language, making communication between them impossible. Initially, this act caused great confusion, ruining the continuation of the project and plans to build a tower that reached the sky. After the confusion of languages, chaos ensued in that city. The inability to coexist in a society with diverse groups of people speaking different languages made communication and coexistence impossible, leading to the dispersion of humanity into different groups and regions. The name Babel is derived from the Hebrew word Babel, meaning confusion. This is a direct reference to the language confusion that occurred in the story. This dispersion of the population across different regions fulfilled God's original will for humanity to spread across the earth after the flood, so that it would be fully populated. Each linguistic group gave rise to its own culture, nation, and identity. The story of the Tower of Babel is often related to the emergence of Semitic languages, such as Hebrew and Aramaic. This has profound implications for the history of language. Moreover, the diversification of human languages resulting from the Tower of Babel shaped the history and culture of humanity, demonstrating how biblical events have profoundly influenced the world over the centuries. The Patriarch's saga, marked by complex family relationships and divinely orchestrated events, played a fundamental role in biblical history, shaping the trajectory of God's people. Abraham, originally called Abram, is considered the central patriarch in Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions. He is revered as a key figure in the relationship between God and humanity. The story of Ishmael and Isaac begins with the complex relationship between Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar. Initially, Abraham and Sarah faced the difficulty of Sarah's sterility. In a moment of concern and questioning by Abraham, God communicated directly with him, offering words of encouragement and reiterating his promise of numerous descendants. However, even after the divine promise, Abraham and Sarah still could not have children. Seeking a solution to the desire for a son and heir, Sarah suggested that Abraham, her husband, have a child with her Egyptian maid, Hagar. Abraham agreed, and Hagar conceived Ishmael. This conception did not occur without conflict. The Bible reports tensions and rivalries between Sarah and Hagar. After Hagar's pregnancy, Sarah began treating her harshly, leading Hagar to flee into the desert. It is in this context that an angel of the Lord found Hagar and prophesied the birth of Ishmael and his descendants. The story took a new turn when Hagar, encouraged by the prophetic words, decided to return to Abraham's household. This return reaffirmed the family connection and also marked the beginning of a journey where the divine purpose for Ishmael would begin to unfold. After Ishmael's birth, the biblical narrative continues with significant events in the lives of Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar. The Bible reports that sometime after Ishmael's birth, God appeared again to Abraham and renewed his promises, specifically mentioning that Sarah, despite her advanced age, would bear a son. Sarah, upon hearing this, initially laughed in disbelief, but God confirmed that nothing was impossible for him. The story culminates with the birth of Isaac, Abraham's second son, but this time with Sarah. The name Isaac means laughter in Hebrew, reflecting Sarah's reaction upon hearing the divine promise. Isaac's birth is marked by joy and gratitude, representing the fulfillment of God's promise of numerous descendants. However, the family dynamics became more complex as the children grew. Tensions between Sarah and Hagar increased, eventually resulting in the expulsion of Hagar and Ishmael. Ishmael, as the rejected son, faced issues of identity and belonging. In the desert, Hagar and Ishmael experienced loneliness and uncertainty. The Bible highlights Hagar's anguish at seeing her son suffer, and Ishmael's struggle to adapt to an unfavorable environment. At a certain point, the situation of Hagar and Ishmael in the desert became desperate. The water ran out, and they faced the prospect of dying of thirst. In her suffering, Hagar placed Ishmael under one of the trees and walked away, unable to bear seeing her son perish. At this critical moment, God intervened. An angel of the Lord called to Hagar from heaven and asked what was wrong. The angel then told Hagar not to be afraid and promised that God had heard Ishmael's cries. The angel revealed that God would provide a great nation from Ishmael. God then opened Hagar's eyes, and she saw a well of water nearby. Hagar went to the well, filled the skin with water, and gave Ishmael a drink. This well miraculously provided. But God saved the lives of Hagar and Ishmael in the desert. After the divine intervention that provided water in the desert, Ishmael and Hagar continued to live in the desert of Paran. Ishmael grew up, became an expert hunter, skilled with the bow and arrow, and his mother Hagar arranged an Egyptian, a marriage for him. The Bible mentions that Ishmael had 12 sons. These are considered ancestors of various Arab tribes. The biblical verse addressing this phase of Ishmael's life in Genesis states, "God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. His mother got a wife for him from Egypt." On the other hand, the promises made to Isaac's descendants are equally impactful. God promised them that their descendants would become a great nation and inherit the promised land. This promise is crucial in the context of Jewish, Christian, and Islamic tradition, as it is associated with the formation of the people of Israel and divine revelation throughout the Old Testament. At the height of his 40 years, Isaac, Abraham's son, embarked on a journey of love and faith by uniting with Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, a union guided by divine design, tracing the first steps of a lineage destined to shape sacred history. However, the couple's happiness faced a challenge in the form of sterility that weighed on Rebekah's heart. Confronting this obstacle, Isaac directed his prayers to the Lord on behalf of his beloved wife. In a profound expression of faith, he lifted his desires to the heavens, trusting in divine providence to overcome the barrier of infertility that plagued them. The answers to Isaac's prayers did not take long to arrive, and Rebekah became pregnant. The miracle of life pulsed in her womb, revealing the divine presence that molded them from the maternal womb. However, during the pregnancy, the baby moved so much inside her that it caused concern. One day, she questioned God, asking, "Why is this happening to me?" God promptly responded, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples will be separated from your insides. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." In this divine revelation, God shared with Rebekah the profound meaning of the turmoil within her. He revealed that the twins she carried were not just brothers, but represented the beginning of two distinct nations. Furthermore, God announced that the elder, Esau, would serve the younger, Jacob, reversing the traditional order of primogeniture. Thus, the divine purpose for Esau and Jacob began to unfold in their mother's womb. The awaited moment finally arrived when Rebekah gave birth. Esau emerged, red and covered with peculiar hair, while Jacob, holding his brother's heel, announced his entry into the world. The birth of these two boys, so distinct in appearance and personality, signaled the fulfillment of the divine promises made to Isaac and Rebekah. As the years passed, the boys grew up. Esau became a skilled hunter, favored by Isaac, while Jacob preferred to stay among the tents and had a closer relationship with Rebekah. Isaac, a venerable father, realized that his journey on earth was nearing its end. Feeling the urgency to bless his firstborn before departing, he called for Esau, his eldest son. However, in the shadows of the tent, Rebekah, a shrewd mother and knowledgeable of divine revelations, overheard the conversation between father and son. God, in his wisdom, had revealed to her that the destined blessing would be for Jacob, the younger son. Thus Rebekah, trusting in the divine promise, devised an ingenious plan to secure her son's destiny. While Esau obediently went out in search of game to please his father, Rebekah instructed Jacob to bring 2 goats from the flock. With skilled hands, she prepared Isaac's favorite dish. Taking advantage of Isaac's frailty, who could no longer see due to his advanced age, she instructed Jacob to pretend to be Esau. The ruse reached its peak when Rebekah covered Jacob's smooth arms with the goat's skins to simulate Esau's hair. The scene was set when Jacob, initially hesitant, followed his mother's plan. Disguised as Esau before Isaac, Jacob received the paternal blessing, influenced by Rebekah's skill in manipulating the situation. The blessing, filled with divine promises, included prosperity, dominion over his brothers, and the power of words that blessed and cursed. The tragedy unfolded when Esau returned from the hunt and discovered the deception. Consumed by fury, he threatened Jacob's life. Fearing for her son's safety, Rebekah advised Jacob to flee to her brother Laban's house until Esau's anger subsided. After leaving his homeland, Jacob embarked on a journey that would take him to Haran, where he intended to find his uncle Laban. During his journey, Jacob arrived at a specific place and decided to rest at nightfall. He used a stone as a pillow and fell asleep. It was during this sleep that Jacob had an extraordinary and meaningful dream. In the dream, Jacob saw a ladder extending from earth to heaven, with angels of God ascending and descending on it. This ladder symbolized the direct connection between heaven and earth, representing open communication between God and humanity. The presence of angels going up and down highlights the constant and active nature of this spiritual connection. Moreover, during the dream, God stood at the top of the ladder and addressed Jacob with a special message. He reaffirmed the promises made to Abraham and Isaac, ensuring that Jacob's descendants would be vast and blessed, spreading across the earth. God also promised to be with Jacob wherever he went, and to bring him back to that land. When Jacob awoke, he realized the sacred importance of the place where he had rested. He exclaimed, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it." In recognition of the spiritual experience, Jacob took the stone that had served as his pillow, set it up as a pillar, poured oil on it as a sign of consecration, and called the place Bethel, meaning house of God. Jacob's journey continued, and one day, near a well, he asked the shepherds about their origin out of curiosity. "My brothers, where are you from?" The answer came, "We are from Haran." In his quest for relatives, Jacob inquired if they knew Laban, the grandson of Nahor, Abraham's brother. The shepherds not only confirmed that they knew him, but also informed Jacob that Rachel, Laban's daughter, would soon arrive at their location. While waiting, Rachel arrived with her sheep. Overcome with emotion at recognizing his relative, Jacob approached, rolled the stone away from the well's mouth, and watered Laban's flock. The encounter led to a deeper revelation of kinship, and Jacob, moved by sincere feelings, kissed Rachel and wept aloud. Rachel then ran to tell her father, Laban, about Jacob's arrival. Hearing about his relative, Laban hurried to greet Jacob with warm embraces. Jacob, in turn, shared his entire story with Laban. Recognizing Jacob as a relative, Laban offered him hospitality. For a month, Jacob stayed under Laban's roof. The host, realizing that his relative was willing to work for the family's good, proposed a deeper alliance. Laban had two daughters, Leah, the older one, and Rachel, the younger, who was remarkably beautiful. Jacob's heart was drawn to Rachel, and he proposed to Laban that he would work for 7 years in exchange for Rachel's hand in marriage. Laban agreed to the proposal, witnessing Jacob's tireless efforts during this period, whose love and devotion were like a firm foundation. The awaited moment arrived, and after 7 years of service, Jacob approached Laban to claim his bride. However, Laban prepared a wedding feast, and at night, in a festive atmosphere, brought Leah, his older daughter, to Jacob, thus consummating the marriage. At dawn, Jacob realized the deception. The morning light revealed that the woman beside him was not Rachel, but Leah. Surprised and perhaps disappointed, Jacob confronted Laban. Laban cunningly explained that it was not customary to marry off the younger daughter before the older one, thus justifying the switch. Laban proposed a solution. Jacob could complete the wedding week with Leah and then be allowed to marry Rachel. However, to secure this second marriage, Jacob would have to commit to working for another 7 years. In a testament to resilience and true love, Jacob agreed to Laban's new agreement. Thus he completed the wedding week with Leah and subsequently formalized his union with Rachel. Driven by his commitment and love, Jacob devoted himself to another 7 years of hard work for Laban. At the end of this period, Jacob, now married to both sisters, Rachel and Leah, consolidated his family under Laban's roof. During this time, he not only faced the challenges of complex family relationships, but also prospered in raising his own flock. God, in his providence, blessed Jacob's efforts, multiplying the animals under his care. However, as Jacob's prosperity grew, tensions with Laban also intensified. Recognizing the need for autonomy and seeking to fulfill the divine promise to return to his father's land, Jacob expressed his desire to leave. Laban, realizing that Jacob's presence was a source of blessing for him, tried to persuade Jacob to stay. However, guided by God's call, Jacob remained firm in his decision. Thus, Jacob, accompanied by his wives, children, and flock, embarked on the journey back to the land of Canaan. However, this return did not occur without fears and significant challenges, primarily the fear of facing Esau, his brother, whose wrath Jacob had feared for years. Before meeting Esau, Jacob devised a shrewd plan to appease his brother's possible anger. He decided to send a caravan of gifts, including animals and valuable goods, across the Jabbok River. This offering was a gesture of reconciliation and an attempt to soften Esau's heart. On the night before the meeting with Esau, Jacob made a crucial decision. He got up, gathered his 2 wives, Leah and Rachel, his 2 maidservants, and his 11 children, and crossed the Jabbok River. Jacob, however, realized that he needed to face his deepest fear and remained alone on the other side of the river. It was then that an extraordinary event occurred. A mysterious man appeared and wrestled with Jacob all night. The struggle was intense and symbolic, representing the battles and challenges Jacob would face on his journey. Jacob had fought all. His life, from the moment of his birth, his conflict with Esau, and even the challenges with Laban. Now, about to reunite with Esau, Jacob faced the most challenging moment of his life. At the height of the struggle, in an attempt to end the confrontation, the man touched the socket of Jacob's hip, leaving him limping. However, even injured, Jacob refused to give up, insisting on receiving a blessing. The man then asked Jacob his name. Jacob's response triggered a significant turning point in the narrative. The man declared, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have prevailed." Here, the name change symbolizes a profound spiritual and identity transformation for Jacob, marking a new chapter in his journey. The man revealed himself as a divine manifestation and granted Jacob a special blessing. Jacob then realized that he had wrestled with God. He called the place Peniel, meaning face of God, for he had seen God face to face, and yet his life was spared. This transformative experience left Jacob with a new identity and a renewed perspective. At dawn, Jacob, limping because of the hip socket touch during the struggle, continued on his journey. We reach the culmination of Jacob and Esau's story, where the long-feared meeting between the brothers draws near. Tension hangs in the air, laden with Esau's previous threat to kill Jacob. Jacob, aware of the delicacy of the situation, takes a measure of humility and submission. He bows 7 times before Esau, a symbolic gesture of respect and submission, demonstrating the depth of his desire for reconciliation. Surprisingly, Esau does not respond with hostility, as many might expect. Instead, he runs towards Jacob, embraces him, and weeps. The scene is powerful, marking the long-awaited reconciliation between the brothers. The bitterness of the past seems to fade away in the face of the genuine expression of forgiveness and fraternal love. Despite the reunion, Jacob and Esau decide to go their separate ways. Jacob settles in Succoth, where he builds a house and shelters for his livestock. This phase of stability symbolizes not only Jacob's material security, but also the peace achieved after years of uncertainty and conflict. He fathered 12 sons, who became the leaders of the 12 tribes of Israel. This remarkable progeny includes prominent figures like Joseph, whose story played a crucial role in the biblical narrative. Joseph was a biblical character from the Old Testament, the son of Jacob and Rachel, and one of Jacob's 12 sons, known as the sons of Israel. Joseph was favored by his father, Jacob, which aroused jealousy among his brothers. Moreover, Joseph had dreams indicating his future position of leadership over his brothers, which intensified their envy. In a crucial event, Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers' well-being while they were tending the flock far from home. When the brothers saw Joseph approaching, they conspired to kill him. However, Reuben, the eldest brother, suggested that they throw him into a cistern instead of killing him. Intending to rescue him later, Reuben planned to save Joseph from his brothers and return him to their father. While Joseph was in the cistern, a group of Ishmaelite traders passed by. Judah, another of Joseph's brothers, suggested selling him as a slave to these merchants. The brothers agreed, and Joseph was sold for 20 pieces of silver. Joseph was then taken to Egypt and later bought by Potiphar, an Egyptian officer and captain of Pharaoh's guard. The Bible does not provide detailed information about Potiphar's origins, but the account in Genesis mentions that he was an Egyptian officer, captain of Pharaoh's guard, and possibly rose to power through his skills and loyal service to the Egyptian court. The title of minister attributed to Potiphar indicates his position as counselor or high-ranking official in the royal court. He was not just a military officer, but also someone in whom Pharaoh placed great trust. Additionally, there is an alternative interpretation of the word minister, suggesting Potiphar might have played the role of executioner, responsible for carrying out Pharaoh's orders, especially concerning prisoners. His strategic position as captain of the guard and minister reveals a character who played a crucial role in the administration and enforcement of Pharaoh's decisions. In Potiphar's house, Joseph quickly demonstrated exceptional skills and was promoted to oversee everything Potiphar owned. The narrative highlights Joseph's prosperity under Potiphar's supervision, indicating the trust Potiphar placed in him. The Bible also mentions Joseph's notable beauty, which attracted the attention of Potiphar and his wife. The story takes a dramatic turn when Potiphar's wife tries to seduce Joseph. However, Joseph refuses her advances, remaining faithful to his moral and ethical principles. Frustrated by the rejection, Potiphar's wife falsely accuses Joseph of attempted rape. This false accusation leads to Joseph's imprisonment, where he remains in jail for a period. Even while unjustly imprisoned, Joseph continues to demonstrate his exceptional abilities, interpreting the dreams of other inmates. One day, two of Pharaoh's officials, the chief cupbearer and the baker, had separate dreams and were troubled by the meaning of their visions. Joseph, known for his dream interpretation skills, noticed the men's distress and offered to help. In the chief cupbearer's dream, he saw a vine with 3 branches. The vine budded, produced grapes, and he squeezed the juice into Pharaoh's cup. Joseph interpreted the dream as a sign of restoration. Within 3 days, the chief cupbearer would be restored to his position and serve Pharaoh again. Meanwhile, the baker dreamed of 3 baskets of bread on his head. In the top basket were pastries for Pharaoh, but birds were eating them. Joseph's interpretation was grim. In 3 days, the baker would be executed, and birds would eat his flesh. Both interpretations proved accurate, and the events unfolded exactly as Joseph had predicted. The chief cupbearer was restored to his position, while the baker was executed. As the dreams indicated, Despite Joseph's predictions coming true, the chief cupbearer, upon being reinstated, forgot to fulfill his promise to mention Joseph to Pharaoh. Thus Joseph remained in prison for some time, facing further challenges. However, his ability to interpret dreams continued to impress. Eventually, Pharaoh had an intriguing dream that troubled his advisors. The chief cupbearer remembered Joseph and his unique ability. Consequently, Joseph was brought before Pharaoh to interpret the dream. He revealed that the dream was a message from God about an impending food shortage in the region. The message said, "Behold, 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt. But after them, 7 years of famine will arise, and all the abundance will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will ravage the land. The abundance in the land will not be remembered because the famine that follows will be so severe." In this passage, Joseph explains to Pharaoh that the dreams represent 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of scarcity, and that God is revealing the future to prepare Egypt for the coming famine. Impressed by Joseph's wisdom, Pharaoh elevates him to a position of prominence, making him governor of Egypt. Joseph is tasked with overseeing the collection and distribution of food during the 7 years of abundance predicted in his dream. His efficient management allows Egypt to store food to face the subsequent 7 years of famine. In this context, Pharaoh decides to intervene by marrying Joseph to Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar. Despite being born and raised in Jacob's household, an environment of faith and tradition, Joseph does not hesitate to marry Asenath, an Egyptian woman. Pharaoh's strategy to neutralize potential issues with Potiphar or Potipharah plays a crucial role in this choice. By marrying Joseph to Potiphar's daughter, Pharaoh effectively ties Joseph to Potiphar's family, thus preventing Potiphar from making any harmful accusations against Joseph or attempting to harm him in any way. This strategic measure aims to ensure that Joseph remains in his leadership position without facing obstacles from Potiphar or his wife, who had previously falsely accused him. Joseph accepts the marriage without objection, realizing the need to establish alliances and ensure stability in his position as a leader in Egypt. Marrying the daughter of an Egyptian priest might have been a strategy to secure support and acceptance within Egyptian society. Due to the famine in the land of Canaan, where Jacob's family was living, Joseph, now a significant figure in the Egyptian government, invited his family to move to Egypt, where they would have access to food and sustenance. Jacob and his sons accepted the offer and settled in the region of Goshen, a fertile area of Egypt. By moving to Egypt, Jacob's family was able to survive the famine and preserve their lineage. This event was part of the fulfillment of the divine promise made to Abraham that his descendants would be numerous. The saga of the patriarchs highlights family relationships, human complexities, and divine faithfulness in fulfilling promises across generations. Each step of this journey shaped the stage for future events, preparing the ground for the continued revelation of God's plan in the history of his people. The Exodus and desert narrative reveal not only Moses' inspiring leadership, but also God's powerful intervention on behalf of his people, thus shaping the identity of the nation of Israel. The story of Moses begins with the narrative of the Israelites, descendants of Jacob, who multiplied in Egypt and were subjected to slavery by Pharaoh. Concerned about the growth of the Hebrew population and fearing they might become a threat, Pharaoh issued a cruel order. He commanded all Hebrew midwives to kill male babies at birth, throwing them into the Nile River. In this context, Moses was born. His mother, Jochebed, and his father, Amram, hid him for 3 months, but when they could no longer hide him, Jochebed made a papyrus basket, coated it with tar and pitch, and placed baby Moses in it. Then she put the basket among the reeds along the Nile's edge. Pharaoh's daughter, who was at the river to bathe, found the basket. Seeing the Hebrew baby, she was filled with compassion and decided to adopt him as her own son. Miriam, Moses' sister, who was watching from a distance, offered to call a Hebrew woman to nurse the baby. Thus, Jochebed was allowed to care for Moses, her own son, while he grew up in Pharaoh's court. Moses grew up in the luxurious corridors of the Egyptian court, experiencing a privileged education and gaining a unique understanding of the complexities of Egyptian society. However, even amid the palace's luxury, Moses never forgot his Hebrew roots. Moses' life took a monumental turn. When Moses was an adult, he witnessed the oppression of his Israelite brothers by the Egyptians. In one incident, seeing an Egyptian mistreating a Hebrew, Moses became enraged and killed the Egyptian. Choosing to renounce royal wealth and fearing the consequences of his act, Moses fled to the desert to escape Pharaoh's wrath. In the desert, Moses sought refuge in the region of Midian, where he met a priest named Jethro. There, he married Zipporah, Jethro's daughter, and became a shepherd. Moses' life in the desert contrasted drastically with the wealth and luxury he had experienced in the Egyptian court. This transition, seemingly contradictory in the world's eyes, was orchestrated by divine will. God shaped Moses during his years of shepherding, preparing him for the mission that awaited him. Moses' journey from Pharaoh's court to the vast horizons of the desert is a testament to divine providence and the faithfulness of those who submit to God's will. Moses spent 40 years tending sheep in the desert before returning to live among the Israelites. During his desert journey, Moses had several encounters with God, revealing a unique divine relationship that would shape the destiny of a people. One of these extraordinary moments occurred on Mount Horeb, when Moses encountered a burning bush that, surprisingly, was not consumed by the fire. As he approached the bush, Moses heard the voice of God speaking directly to him. This divine manifestation through the burning bush was a supernatural way to capture Moses' attention and indicate that God was present at that sacred moment. Initially, Moses resisted the divine call, feeling inadequate for the grand mission proposed by God. His reluctance reflected a limited understanding of his abilities and the magnitude of the task ahead. However, God, in his infinite wisdom, assured Moses by revealing his sacred name. "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." And Moses covered his face because he was afraid to look at God. This divine assurance not only dispelled Moses' doubts but also conferred celestial authority on his mission. This episode marked the beginning of Moses' call to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. The burning bush is therefore a significant symbol in biblical tradition, representing God's holiness, his ability to manifest in extraordinary ways, and the divine call to a specific mission. Upon returning to Egypt, Moses and Aaron, his older brother, presented themselves before Pharaoh, requesting the release of the Hebrew people. However, Pharaoh resisted and, instead of freeing the Israelites, increased their workload. God then initiated a series of plagues on Egypt to demonstrate his power and force their release. The plagues included turning the Nile's water into blood, infestations of frogs, lice and flies, pestilence on livestock, boils, hail, locusts, darkness, and finally, the death of the firstborns. After each plague, Pharaoh promised to release the people, but always changed his stance. As the plagues ravaged Egypt, Pharaoh's resistance to freeing the Israelites remained unyielding. Determined to liberate his people, God announced the last and most devastating plague, the death of the firstborns. This would be the final blow that would compel Pharaoh to relent. Moses, obeying divine instructions, announced the imminence of the 10th plague. God instructed the Israelites to mark their doorposts with lamb's blood. On the designated night, The angel of death would pass through Egypt, but where he saw the blood on the doors, he would pass over that house without causing harm. Midnight brought a deep and silent darkness, interrupted only by the lamentation in Egyptian homes. From Pharaoh's palace to humble dwellings, the plague struck every family, taking the life of the firstborn in each home, not protected by the blood. The cries and anguish echoed through the streets, as Pharaoh, struck by personal loss, finally relented. Amid the sorrow and urgency, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron, instructing them to leave immediately with the Israelites. The Egyptian nation was weary of the horrors inflicted by the plagues, and Pharaoh, confronted with the death of his own son, could no longer bear the presence of the Hebrews in his territory. Thus, after years of servitude and prolonged exile, the Israelites, guided by Moses, began their journey to freedom. Tasked with leading over 2 million slaves out of Egypt, Moses played a crucial role in executing the divine plan of liberation. In the desert, Moses guided the Israelites through various challenges, facing water scarcity, hunger, and confrontations with other nations. God provided manna from heaven and water from a rock to sustain them. Moses also ascended Mount Sinai, where he received the 10 Commandments and other laws to guide the people. Moses' leadership was marked by challenges, but his faithfulness to God and his guidance of the Israelites out of Egypt solidified his position as one of the great biblical leaders. Moses was designated not only as a political leader, but also as a spiritual guide, leading God's chosen people toward liberation and the promise of the Promised Land. Additionally, Moses, anointed by God, became an instrument of powerful miracles recorded in the sacred pages. Among the notable miracles performed by Moses, the parting of the Red Sea stands out. One day, while fleeing the Egyptian army, Moses and the Israelites encountered the Red Sea before them, preventing their escape. At this crucial moment, God commanded Moses to stretch out his hand over the sea. In an act of faith, Moses obeyed, and the waters began to part miraculously, forming 2 walls of water on either side, leaving a dry path in the middle. This path became the escape route for the Israelites, providing them with a miraculous passage through the waters. As the Israelites crossed the Red Sea, the waters held firm, protecting them from the pursuing Egyptian army. However, when the Egyptians ventured into the sea, the waters returned to their normal course, drowning and destroying the enemy army. Another remarkable miracle would occur soon after. After crossing the Red Sea, the Israelites, led by Moses, journeyed through the desert toward the Promised Land. After days of travel, they arrived at Marah. However, they discovered that the waters there were bitter and unfit for consumption. The disappointment and imminent need for potable water shook the people's confidence. It was at this challenging moment that Moses, guided by God, took an action seemingly simple but deeply significant. He cast a piece of wood into the bitter waters of Marah, and immediately a miracle occurred. The bitter waters were transformed into sweet and potable waters, providing relief and renewal for the thirsty Israelites. The choice of wood as the instrument to perform this miracle is symbolic. In biblical tradition, wood often represents redemption and healing. This action by Moses not only addressed the immediate need for water, but also conveyed a deeper message about the divine ability to transform bitter situations into renewed and restorative experiences. In various situations, Moses and Aaron, God's designated leaders, were confronted by the Israelites, who in their thirst and desperation questioned the divine leadership. In moments of despair, some slaves argued that it would have been better to remain in Egypt, where at least they would have water to quench their thirst. The tension and dissatisfaction reached their peak at Meribah Kadesh. In response to the people's complaint, God instructed Moses to speak to a rock, and it would provide water for the thirsty people. "Take the staff, and you and your brother, Aaron, gather the assembly. Speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will pour out its water." You will bring water out of the rock for the community and their livestock. However, instead of speaking to the rock, Moses, in his frustration with the people's grumbling, struck the rock with his staff. Although water flowed from the rock, this action resulted in significant consequences for Moses. God rebuked Moses for not trusting his word and acting in anger before the people. Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them. As a result, Moses and Aaron were prohibited from entering the promised land, a severe punishment for disobedience at that critical moment. The incident at Meribah Kadesh serves as a reminder in the biblical narrative about the importance of unwavering trust in God, even in the most challenging circumstances. Moses, though he led the Israelites with great faith and courage, experienced the consequences of his specific lack of trust at that crucial moment. Moses' death is shrouded in mystery and uniqueness, revealing a unique episode in the biblical narrative. According to the scriptures, Moses climbed Mount Nebo, where he viewed the promised land before his passing. The account is recorded in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 34. Then Moses climbed from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo, to the top of Pisgah, across from Jericho. And the Lord showed him the whole land, from Gilead to Dan, all of Naphtali, the territory of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the Mediterranean Sea, the Negev and the whole region from the valley of Jericho, the city of palms as far as Zoar. And the Lord said to him, "This is the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your own eyes, but you will not cross over into it." So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, as the word of the Lord had said. And God buried him in a valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor. But to this day no one knows the place of his burial. Although Moses did not enter the promised land physically, his role as leader and lawgiver left a lasting legacy. His death marked the end of an era and the transition of command to Joshua, who would lead the Israelites in conquering the promised land. The conquest of the promised land, led by Joshua after Moses' death, is an exciting saga that highlights Joshua's courageous leadership and the challenges faced by the people of Israel as they sought to establish themselves in the land God had promised. Joshua, a dedicated disciple of Moses, was chosen by God to lead the Israelites across the Jordan and spearhead the military campaign to take possession of the promised land. His commitment to the divine will and his unwavering faith made him a central figure in this crucial chapter of Israelite history. However, before the actual entry into the land, a significant episode highlighted the tension between faith and disbelief. Joshua sent 12 spies to explore the land of Canaan. Although the land was abundant and fertile, most of the spies returned with a fearful report, emphasizing the challenges and seemingly insurmountable fortresses of the Canaanite cities. Only Joshua and Caleb maintained a confident perspective in God's ability to deliver the promised land. The people's disbelief, influenced by the negative report of most spies, resulted in significant consequences. In his justice, God determined that that doubtful generation would not enter the promised land. Thus, for 40 years, the Israelites wandered in the desert, learning lessons of trust and total dependence on God. Finally, under Joshua's leadership, the conquest of the promised land began gradually and strategically. Cities like Jericho, known for its formidable walls, fell before divinely inspired plans. Each victory, despite the challenges, confirmed God's faithfulness to his promise and strengthened the people's confidence in Joshua as the appointed leader. The gradual conquest of the promised land not only symbolized the fulfillment of the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but also solidified Israel's position as a people chosen by God. This chapter of biblical history narrates epic events of battles and victories, highlighting the importance of faith, obedience, and unwavering trust in divine providence. The period of the Judges, a phase in Israel's history between the conquest of the Promised Land and the establishment of the monarchy, is marked by a repetition of cycles that reveal the people's spiritual instability and tendency to disobey God. During this time, the Israelites experienced a series of periods of apostasy in which they strayed from exclusive worship of God, indulging in idolatrous practices and disobeying divine laws. This cycle of disobedience led to oppressions by neighboring nations, prompting the Israelites to cry out for help. In His mercy, God raised up judges to deliver the people from oppression and guide them back to the path of obedience. These leaders, inspired by the Holy Spirit, played crucial roles during the turbulent periods of the Judges. Among them, Gideon stands out, the fearless leader who, despite his initial reluctance, led the Israelites to victory against the Midianites. In this battle, God instructed Gideon to reduce his army considerably to demonstrate that the victory would be a divine work. With a small group of men, Gideon defeated the Midianites through a clever strategy involving torches and pitchers at night. The victory was achieved remarkably, and Gideon became a judge of Israel for 40 years. Jephthah, another judge, faced personal challenges and led the Israelites against their enemies. Samson was also a judge of Israel, and his story is fantastic. Samson was miraculously born to a woman named Manoah, who was barren. One day, an angel of the Lord appeared to Manoah and announced Samson's birth, instructing that he be consecrated as a Nazirite from birth, abstaining from wine and avoiding contamination with impure things. Samson grew, and with the Spirit of the Lord upon him, demonstrated extraordinary physical strength. Despite the Nazirite restrictions, Samson became romantically involved with a Philistine woman named Delilah. Delilah, a Philistine woman, enters the story as Samson's great love. However, contrary to true love, her interest in Samson was motivated by greed and loyalty to her nation. The Philistine leaders approached Delilah for help in discovering the source of Samson's supernatural strength, which posed a threat to their dominion. Delilah, aware of her influence over Samson, decided to use her charms to discover the secret of his strength. She initiated a series of insistent questions, probing Samson's weakness. The plot involves Delilah questioning Samson repeatedly, seeking the truth behind his strength. Each time, Samson gave deceptive answers, testing Delilah's trust and loyalty. The story reaches a critical point when Delilah, persistent in her quest, finally leads Samson to reveal the truth about his strength, which is tied to his Nazirite vow, including abstaining from cutting his hair. With this crucial information, Delilah betrays Samson, cutting his hair while he sleeps. Delilah's betrayal leads to Samson's capture by the Philistines, who blind and chain him. However, the story does not end there. Despite his blindness and condition as a prisoner, Samson invokes divine help, regaining his strength one last time. In the climactic moment, Samson topples the pillars of the Philistine temple, sacrificing himself to defeat his enemies. Delilah's story serves as a warning about the dangers of manipulation, betrayal, and misplaced trust. Her pursuit of personal gain and loyalty to her nation results in Samson's downfall and eventually her own ruin. Beyond these leaders, Samuel emerged as a prominent figure during the end of the period of the Judges. His story also deserves attention. Elkanah was a man with two wives, Peninnah and Hannah. Hannah, the barren wife, was deeply saddened by not having children, while Peninnah had children. Annually, the family went to the sanctuary at Shiloh to worship God. On one of these visits to Shiloh, Hannah was so anguished by her infertility that she prayed fervently to the Lord, promising to dedicate her son to God if he blessed her with a child. God heard Hannah's pleas, and she conceived a son. She named him Samuel, meaning asked of God. After Samuel was weaned, Hannah fulfilled her promise and took him to the sanctuary at Shiloh, entrusting him to serve the Lord under the care of the priest Eli. Samuel grew up in the sanctuary at Shiloh, where he learned to serve God under Eli's tutelage. God called Samuel to be a prophet from a young age, and he became one of Israel's most prominent leaders and judges. His role, recorded in the book of Judges, highlights not only his wisdom, but also his deep trust in divine power. Deborah emerged as a leader at a time when Israel was being oppressed by the Canaanites, specifically by the enemy commander Sisera. The people of Israel cried out to God for deliverance, and God responded through Deborah, who served as a spiritual leader and judicial ruler. Deborah demonstrated deep faith in God, and her role as a prophetess suggests an intimate connection with divine guidance. She summoned Barak, an Israelite military leader, to lead the troops in battle against Sisera. Besides prophesying victory over Sisera, Deborah warned that the glory of victory would be credited to a woman, not to Barak. After the battle led by Barak and Deborah against Sisera, Sisera fled the battlefield towards Jael's tent, who was a Kenite woman. Sisera sought refuge in Jael's tent as he was familiar with the Kenites and hoped to find shelter there. Jael welcomed him, offering him milk to drink and a blanket to rest. While Sisera was sleeping, Jael seized the opportunity to act. She took a tent peg and, with great courage and determination, hammered it through Sisera's temple, driving it into the ground. This act resulted in Sisera's death. Jael's act of killing Sisera fulfilled Deborah's prophecy that the glory of victory would not be credited to Barak, but to a woman. The battle resulted in the defeat of the Canaanites and the liberation of Israel. Deborah expressed her gratitude to God for his intervention with a hymn of praise recorded in the book of Judges chapter 5, known as the Song of Deborah. If you are enjoying the content, consider subscribing to the channel and clicking the like button to receive more content like this. The period of the Judges is characterized by the dynamic interplay between Israel's infidelity, divine discipline, and God's gracious provision through appointed leaders. This phase in Israel's history prepared the ground for the transition to the era of the kings, a new phase in the journey of God's people. The monarchy period in Israel was marked by events of extreme importance, beginning with the people's request for a king, through the reigns of Saul, David, and Solomon, to the tragic division of the kingdom after Solomon's death. The people's desire for a king was motivated by observing other nations around them that had monarchs. Although this decision was accepted by God as a reflection of the people's will, it also evidenced a certain lack of trust in God as their supreme ruler. God, respecting the people's choice, granted them a king, and Saul was anointed as Israel's first king. Saul's reign was marked by notable successes, such as the victory over the Amalekites, but also by failures, including disobedience to divine instructions. Subsequently, David, a young shepherd anointed by Samuel, was chosen by God as king. It all begins in Bethlehem, a small town in Judah where a simple family lived. David, a young shepherd, found in his sheep not just a flock, but also a divine school. In the green fields, he learned the art of leading, protecting, and nurturing. His courage was forged in defense against the threats that loomed. With his harp in hand, he found an intimate connection with the divine in the songs he sang to his sheep. Jesse, David's father, was a God-fearing man. When the prophet Samuel was sent by God to anoint the next king of Israel, Jesse presented his sons before him. However, God did not choose Jesse's older sons, who were strong and impressive to human eyes. Instead, God instructed Samuel to anoint Jesse's youngest, the young shepherd David. David was a man after God's own heart, not for his outward appearance, but for his obedient heart and unwavering faith. Even being the youngest and least notable, in human eyes, God saw something special in David. It was then that Samuel heard the divine voice, "This is the one." Udil, the anointing oil flowed over David's head, not only consecrating him as king, but marking him as God's chosen. There, in the fields that witnessed his humility, David received a divine mission. Thus, David began his journey, carrying not just a shepherd's staff, but the divine anointing that would guide his steps to the throne of Israel. At this time, the Philistines and the Israelites were in conflict over territorial issues, power disputes, and historical rivalries between these two peoples. Later, the situation reached its peak when the Philistines gathered their army and prepared to face the Israelites. The two armies were camped in opposing positions with a valley between them. The Philistines had Goliath, a giant warrior, as their champion, and he challenged the Israelites to send a representative to fight him in a single combat. The proposal was that if Goliath won, the Israelites would surrender. If the Israelite representative won, the Philistines would surrender. This single combat challenge aimed to avoid a large-scale conflict, saving lives and deciding the battle more efficiently. Goliath, besides his physical imposingness, taunted the Israelites with insults, mocking their faith and courage. However, the Israelite soldiers were apprehensive, and none dared to face this formidable giant. Yet, in the heart of the unthinkable, David volunteered. Far from the pompous armor of the soldiers, he chose to face the giant with a sling, 5 stones, and above all, an unwavering faith in God. King Saul, perplexed, questioned the young shepherd's choice, but David proclaimed confidence in his experience as a shepherd, where he had faced lions and bears to protect his sheep. He did not fear Goliath, for he trusted in something greater than his own abilities. The day of battle came, and as Goliath advanced, David ran towards the giant. With a single stone launched, guided by the divine hand, the trajectory of history changed. Goliath, the invincible giant in the eyes of men, fell defeated. The victory did not belong to physical strength, but to the fearless faith of a young shepherd who trusted in the living God. What began as a story of admiration and triumph eventually unfolded into a drama laden with jealousy, betrayal, and surprisingly, an unwavering friendship. King Saul, once anointed by God to lead Israel, found in David a valiant warrior and military leader. However, as David's victories accumulated and his popularity grew, a shadow of discontent took hold of Saul's heart. What could have been a relationship of mentorship and cooperation turned into envy and fear of the young anointed's success. The turning point came when the women of Israel sang, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." 1 Samuel 18:7. This simple melody, celebrating the achievements of both leaders, triggered an uncontrollable fury in Saul's heart. From that moment, the shadow of jealousy obscured his vision and altered the course of his relationship with David. Saul, consumed by paranoia and jealousy, began plotting David's death. He attempted to hurl a spear at him, while David played the harp to soothe the king's torments. He sent him into dangerous battles, hoping he would fall into the hands of enemies. But despite all of Saul's efforts, David continued to prosper, protected by the hand of God. While Saul and David's relationship crumbled, an unexpected friendship blossomed. Jonathan, Saul's son, was captivated by David's courage and character. This friendship flourished amid the growing hostility of Saul towards David. Jonathan, in an act of courage and loyalty, warned David of his father's nefarious plans. The friendship between David and Jonathan became a bastion of hope and emotional support. Even when Saul was determined to destroy David, Jonathan stood by his friend, willing to sacrifice his own position to protect the one he knew was chosen by God. Their story reaches its climax when Jonathan acknowledges that God had chosen David to be the next king, not himself. This acknowledgement reveals extraordinary humility and detachment, as Jonathan accepted the role God had destined for David, instead of clinging to the power and position he would naturally have as heir to the throne. Later, during a battle against the Philistines in the region of Mount Gilboa, King Saul faced his tragic death. Jonathan, the apparent heir to the throne, also fell alongside his father. With Saul and Jonathan's deaths, David finally ascended to the throne of Israel. He did not rush to assume the throne, but sought divine guidance. David's lament for the loss of Saul and Jonathan is recorded in a poem that captured the complexity of his emotions. How the mighty have fallen in battle. Jonathan lies slain on your heights. I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You were very dear to me. Your love for me was wonderful, more wonderful than that of women. David stood out as a skilled military leader. His victorious campaigns expanded Israel's borders and consolidated his position as a respected king. However, the most significant of his achievements was bringing the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. With fervent passion for the worship of God, David desired to bring the divine presence to the capital of Israel. The Ark of the Covenant, also known as the Ark of the Testimony, was a sacred object mentioned in the Bible, primarily in the Old Testament. Inside the Ark were placed the Ten Commandments, the stone tablets on which were written the moral principles given by God to Moses on Mount Sinai. The Ark also contained a jar of manna, the bread that God miraculously provided to the Israelites during their journey in the desert, and Aaron's rod that budded as a sign of his selection as high priest. The Ark of the Covenant held profound spiritual significance for the Israelites, as it represented God's presence among his people and symbolized the covenant between God and Israel. David, with joy and celebration, brought the Ark to Jerusalem, dancing before it with humility and devotion. This event not only symbolized the centrality of worship in David's life, but also marked Jerusalem as the city chosen by God. Amidst the laurels of his military victories and achievements as king, David, anointed by God, found himself plunged into a dark episode that shook the foundations of his life. The incident involved Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah, one of David's mighty warriors. Upon seeing Bathsheba while she was bathing, David succumbed to temptation and committed adultery with her. This act, permeated by lust and selfishness, set off a chain of events that would alter the course of David's life and profoundly affect his relationship with God. Bathsheba became pregnant as a result of this encounter, and the plot thickened further when David tried to cover up his sin. Realizing Bathsheba's pregnancy, David, in an effort to disguise the adultery, tried to bring Uriah, who was at battle, back home, hoping he would lie with his wife and thus conceal the true paternity of the child. However, Uriah, a man of integrity, refused to enjoy the comforts of home while his companions were in the battlefield. Faced with this loyalty, David, in an act of desperation, sent Uriah to the front lines of battle, where he was deliberately placed in danger and ultimately killed. David acknowledged his guilt and sin before God. His frustration and lamentation are demonstrated in Psalm 51, a poem of deep repentance, where David pleads for mercy and divine forgiveness. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love. According to your great compassion, blot out my transgressions. Psalm 51. God, in his grace, responded to David's sincere repentance, forgiving his sins, but earthly consequences still manifested. The child resulting from the adultery died, and David's house was marked by family conflicts and instability. At the height of his reign, after David had faced battles, built Jerusalem, and consolidated the kingdom of Israel, he found himself at a crucial moment. Now old and weakened, David, becoming aware of his own mortality and guided by divine direction, realized it was time to transfer the promise of the covenant to the next generation. The account of this moment is recorded in 1 Kings chapter 2. David summoned his son Solomon, who was about to succeed him as king, and shared with him the importance of the covenant that God had established. David reminded him of the divine, a promise that a descendant of his would perpetually rule over Israel, highlighting the responsibility and grandeur of this mission. David's death is recorded in the Old Testament in the book of 1 Kings. The biblical narrative does not provide specific details about the cause of David's death, but indicates that he died at an old age after a long reign. In his final moments, David called his son Solomon and gave him final instructions and wise counsel. These instructions included guidance on how Solomon should govern and treat certain people in his kingdom. Solomon's ascension to the throne of Israel occurred in a context marked by familial challenges and intrigues. After David's death, his son Adonijah attempted to seize the throne, but the prophetic intervention of Nathan and Bathsheba ensured that Solomon, God's chosen one, was crowned king. God's revelation to David, stating that Solomon would succeed him and build the temple in Jerusalem, occurs in 1 Chronicles chapter 22, with God saying the following: "You have shed much blood and have fought many wars. You will not build a house in my name, because you have shed much blood on the earth in my sight. But you will have a son who will be a man of peace and rest. I will give him rest from all his enemies on every side. His name will be Solomon, and I will grant Israel peace and quiet during his reign." Solomon, known for the meaning of his name, which translates to peace, began his reign promoting stability and unity in the kingdom. The most prominent characteristic of Solomon, which distinguished him among the leaders of his time, was his extraordinary wisdom. Solomon made a significant covenant with God during the early days of his reign, a moment that evidences not only his wisdom, but also his intention to seek divine guidance in his governance. This covenant and its conditions are documented in the book of 1 Kings, chapter 3, verses 3 to 14. The key event happened in Gibeon, where Solomon offered sacrifices before the Lord. That night, God appeared to Solomon in a dream and said, "Ask for whatever you want me to give you." In response, Solomon expressed his humility, acknowledging the greatness of the responsibility of leading the people of Israel, and specifically mentioned his need for wisdom to judge and govern with justice. He recognized the absolute dependence on God to guide his steps and make wise decisions that would benefit the people of Israel. Solomon's choice to ask for wisdom instead of wealth or personal success demonstrated his desire to lead with integrity and justice, reflecting the heart of a wise and God-fearing leader. God's response to Solomon's plea was remarkable. God praised the king's choice, and in addition to granting the wisdom Solomon asked for, also promised additional blessings, including wealth and honor that would be unparalleled in all of Israel's history. A famous episode illustrating this wisdom is the judgment of the two women who disputed the motherhood of a child. The narrative found in 1 Kings chapter 3, verses 16 to 28, describes two women living together who gave birth at the same time. However, one of the children died, leading both women to claim the surviving child as their own. Faced with this impasse, the women appeared before King Solomon seeking justice. Instead of making a hasty decision, Solomon proposed an extraordinary solution. He suggested dividing the child in half and giving half to each woman. The response of each woman revealed the true mother. The woman who genuinely loved the child implored the king not to harm the child and instead suggested that the child be given to the other woman. The other woman, who was not the biological mother, agreed to the division proposal. Solomon's astute response revealed the true mother. the woman who was willing to give up the child to protect it from harm. Solomon then proclaimed that the true mother was the one who demonstrated genuine maternal love and ordered that the child be given to her. Beyond his wisdom, Solomon was also known for his remarkable achievements, including the construction of the temple in Jerusalem. This grand project not only served as the spiritual center of the kingdom, but also symbolized God's continuous presence among the people of Israel. The grandeur of the temple demonstrated not only Solomon's administrative skill, but also the wealth and prosperity of the kingdom. The desire to build a temple dedicated to the Lord was initially conceived by his father, King David. However, it was Solomon who carried forward this noble project. The biblical narrative describes intricate details and precious materials, such as cedar from Lebanon for the structure and pure gold for adornments. These were used in the construction of the temple, reflecting the king's dedication and reverence toward God. The chosen location for the temple, Mount Moriah, held deep symbolic significance, being the same place where Abraham demonstrated his faith by being willing to sacrifice his son Isaac. This act of faith and obedience that preceded the temple highlighted the continuity of the special relationship between God and his people. Solomon's temple became the spiritual and cultural epicenter of Israel, a symbol of unity and worship. Solomon also dedicated himself to international alliances, solidifying trade and diplomatic relations. The visit of the Queen of Sheba, who came to test Solomon's wisdom, is a notable example of these external relations. These events are recorded in 1 Kings chapter 10, verses 1 to 13, and in 2 Chronicles chapter 9, verses 1 to 12. Upon arriving in Jerusalem, the Queen of Sheba presented Solomon with difficult questions, testing his wisdom. The Bible recounts that Solomon answered all her questions, and there was nothing too difficult for him to explain. The Queen's journey to Jerusalem was marked by an impressive caravan, carrying an abundance of spices, gold, and precious stones. The exchange of gifts during the visit highlights the diplomatic nature of this encounter. Besides the Queen of Sheba's visit, Solomon also established diplomatic relations with other kingdoms. He made marital alliances with princesses from neighboring nations, such as Egypt and Phoenicia, a common practice at the time to strengthen alliances and promote peace between kingdoms. However, throughout his reign, Solomon was not immune to failures. Although Solomon was celebrated for his wisdom and grandeur, his story is also marked by mistakes and deviations, which eventually had significant consequences for his reign and the history of Israel. One of Solomon's main deviations was his involvement with foreign women, contrary to divine instructions. The Bible reports in 1 Kings chapter 11, verses 1 to 3, that Solomon loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter and took princesses from neighboring nations, going against God's law that forbade marriages with women who worshipped other gods. These marriages were not just political alliances, but also introduced foreign cultural and religious influences into Israel. The foreign wives brought with them their religious practices and gradually exerted a negative influence on Solomon. He began to tolerate the worship of various idols and participate in rituals that were contrary to the exclusive worship of the God of Israel. The culmination of this deviation was the construction of temples for idols in honor of his wives' deities, an act that directly contradicted the commandments given by God. This apostasy, which included the construction of altars for deities such as Ashtoreth and Molech, provoked God's anger. Solomon's later days, recounted in 1 Kings chapters 11 and 12, were marked by a mix of glory and shadows, revealing the complexities of life and governance. As Solomon aged, his previous choices, especially regarding marriages with foreign women and the acceptance of idol worship, began to negatively impact his reign. God's wrath was manifested, and he raised adversaries against Solomon. Jeroboam, a trusted official, rebelled against the king and became a prominent leader who would eventually lead the northern tribes. Solomon's death would mark the end of an era. He died after a 40-year reign, leaving a legacy that included the majestic construction of the temple in Jerusalem and an unprecedented period of peace and prosperity. The Bible does not provide specific details about the exact cause of Solomon's death. However, in 1 Kings chapter 11, verses 41 to 43, it is recorded, "As for the other events of Solomon's reign, all he did and the wisdom he displayed, are they not written in the book of the annals of Solomon? Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel 40 years. Then he rested with his ancestors and was buried in the city of David, his father." After King Solomon's death, the pages of Israel's history witnessed a tumultuous and crucial transition. Solomon's reign, known for its wisdom, splendor, and grand projects, came to an end, leaving behind a kingdom that experienced both glory and tension. The construction of the temple and the kingdom's expansive activities imposed significant taxes and required an extensive workforce. This heavy tax burden and work demands began to generate discontent among the tribes and the general population. The people who initially admired Solomon for his wisdom now felt the weight of the obligations imposed in the name of royal splendor. The political environment was tense, with growing dissatisfaction among the tribes. Furthermore, social issues also played a crucial role. The division between social classes became more pronounced, as an elite benefited from Solomon's achievements, while the rest of the population experienced the consequences of governmental policies. This scenario of discontent and division set the stage for Rehoboam's succession and the crucial decisions that would shape Israel's history. Rehoboam, unlike his father, faced a complex scenario. Solomon, known for his wisdom and the grandeur of the temple he built, left behind a reign that, despite prosperity, generated discontent among the people. The demands imposed to sustain Solomon's monumental feats became a heavy burden for many. There was widespread hope that Rehoboam, upon taking the throne, would take measures to alleviate the excessive demands imposed during his father's reign. The people desired a leader who understood their difficulties, a ruler willing to listen and respond to their concerns. At a crucial point in the royal succession, Rehoboam, heir to the throne after Solomon's death, found himself before a significant meeting with the representatives of the people of Israel. This meeting was not just a mere formality, but a decisive moment that would shape the course of the kingdom's history. The people's representatives openly expressed the difficulties faced by the population due to the excessive demands that permeated Solomon's reign. The burden of taxes, forced labor, and growing demands generated widespread discontent. At the critical moment when Rehoboam faced the crucial decision of how to respond to the people's demands, he found himself before two different streams of advice. On one side, the elders, wise and experienced, offered thoughtful and well-founded advice based on a deep understanding of the kingdom's dynamics. These older advisors, knowledgeable of traditions and political complexities, advised Rehoboam to adopt a posture of understanding towards the people. They advised easing the demands and showing empathy towards the tribes of Israel. However, on the other side, the young advisors, perhaps driven by the energy of youth and a more immediate vision, suggested an opposite approach. They encouraged Rehoboam to adopt a more authoritarian stance, to reinforce the demands and to show firmness that could command respect. The perspective of these younger advisors reflected a less conciliatory approach, more focused on maintaining control and taxes. Faced with the divergent advice, Rehoboam chose to follow the suggestion of the young advisors. He opted for an inflexible stance, refusing to ease the burdens imposed during Solomon's reign. Rehoboam's refusal to yield to the people's demands resulted in a wave of discontent that quickly turned into a turbulent sea of dissatisfaction. The northern tribes, led by Jeroboam, could not tolerate the ongoing oppression and the king's refusal to hear their needs. This tumultuous scenario culminated in Jeroboam's decision to lead the separation of the northern tribes, forming the Northern Kingdom of Israel, known simply as Israel. After the kingdom's division, Rehoboam, the king of Judah, took measures to mobilize an army seeking to regain control over the newly formed Northern Kingdom led by Jeroboam. However, divine intervention was present in this tense scenario. God, through a clear message, forbade the southern tribes from proceeding with military action, instructing them not to fight against their own brothers. God further warned that the division was under his complete control and that everything was happening according to his sovereign will. 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 24. In this context, the book of 1 Kings also describes that God sent prophets, such as Ahijah, to deliver messages of judgment against Jeroboam and his house, due to the apostasy and idolatry of his reign. Prophesying before the emerging leader, Ahijah predicted the rise of the northern kingdom and set forth recommendations for its future. Jeroboam was instructed to lead according to divine principles, with the promise of a lasting dynasty if he obeyed. However, disobedience to divine orders would result in serious consequences. However, Jeroboam, the leader of the northern kingdom, fearing that his subjects might return to Jerusalem during their religious pilgrimages, made the unfortunate decision to build altars with golden calves in Bethel and Dan as alternative places of worship. This not only diverted the people from their spiritual traditions centered in Jerusalem, but also introduced idolatry and a departure from true worship. This strategy not only symbolized political separation, but also established a distinct identity for the northern kingdom of Israel. Meanwhile, in the southern kingdom of Judah, Jeroboam faced the consequences of his choices. With the separation, Judah became a smaller kingdom centered in Jerusalem, but maintaining the line of David's descendants on the throne. The temple and religious traditions remained under the authority of the southern kingdom, and the Davidic dynasty continued to rule, albeit on a reduced scale. The biblical narrative highlights that under Rehoboam's reign, Judah faced challenges and conflicts. The king sought to consolidate power and strengthen Judah's position, but also faced external and internal threats. There were periods of political instability and confrontations with neighboring nations. The Bible does not provide specific details about Rehoboam's death. However, in the second book of Chronicles, it is mentioned that Rehoboam reigned in Jerusalem for 17 years, and after his death, his son Abijah, also known as Abijam, succeeded him on the throne of Judah. As for Jeroboam, the Bible does not detail the specific circumstances of his death, but mentions that he reigned for 22 years and died. The Book of Kings indicates that Jeroboam rested with his ancestors and his son Nadab became king in his place. This configuration of reign divided into two independent states did not last long. The northern kingdom, led by a succession of kings who often strayed from God's ways, lasted only 2 centuries as Ahijah prophesied to Jeroboam. Its collapse occurred in 722 BC. Faced with the advances of the Assyrian armies, Samaria, the capital of the northern kingdom, was besieged and eventually conquered. The people of Israel were taken into exile, dispersed among the nations. In turn, the southern kingdom, known as Judah, faced a similar fate, but at a later time. Babylon emerged as a conquering power, and in 586 BC, Jerusalem, the capital of Judah, succumbed to Babylonian forces. The temple, the central symbol of Jewish worship, was destroyed, and a significant portion of the population was taken captive. to Babylon. Thus, Rehoboam's unfortunate choice, instead of unifying the tribes under his rule, triggered the division and future collapse of his kingdom. The history of both Israel and Judah is filled with episodes of idolatry, where the people turned to false gods, abandoning the Lord. In response, God sent a series of prophets to warn and call to accountability. Prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Hosea, and Amos highlighted the spiritual and temporal consequences of disobedience. Divine discipline manifested through events such as foreign invasions, exile, and the destruction of cities. The history of the northern and southern kingdoms would serve as a perpetual reminder of the importance of loyalty to God and the spiritual consequences associated with the choice of disobedience. The Babylonian captivity represents one of the darkest periods in Israel's history, marked by the fall of Jerusalem, the exile of the people to Babylon, and paradoxically, by the notable work of prophets like Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. The narrative of the Babylonian captivity begins with the invasion of King Nebuchadnezzar II and his Babylonian troops in Jerusalem. This event culminated in the destruction of the temple and the deportation of the Jewish population to Babylon, an exile that lasted decades. The city that was once the symbol of divine presence was reduced to rubble, and God's chosen people were taken captive to a foreign land. Amid this crisis, notable prophets emerged who played crucial roles in guiding and comforting the exiled people. Jeremiah, known as the Weeping Prophet, foresaw the imminent destruction of Jerusalem and urged the people to accept divine discipline. Daniel, a captive in the Babylonian court, stood out for his faithfulness to God amid adversity and his interpretative ability of dreams and visions. And Ezekiel, who was among the exiles, conveying symbolic visions and messages, emphasized the importance of repentance and hope for a restored future. Before the Babylonian exile, Ezekiel exercised his ministry as a priest in the Temple of Jerusalem. However, in 597 BC, when the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II invaded Jerusalem, he was deported to Babylon along with King Jehoiakim and other leaders. In this context, Ezekiel transitioned from priest to prophet, receiving powerful visions and direct messages from God. During this period, the people of Israel faced the consequences of their disobedience to the covenant with God, known as the Mosaic Covenant or Sinai Covenant. This covenant was established when Moses led the people out of Egypt, as recorded in the book of Exodus, specifically in chapters 19 to 24. The Mosaic Covenant was a mutual promise between God and Israel. God gave the Israelites the 10 Commandments and a series of laws to guide their moral, ethical, and ritual conduct. In exchange for obedience to these laws, God promised to bless and protect Israel, making them a special nation among the peoples. However, this covenant also included warnings about the consequences of disobedience. God warned that if the people strayed from his laws, they would face judgments and punishments, including exile and the loss of divine blessings. Throughout history, the Israelites frequently deviated from the covenant. The situation worsened after Solomon's reign, when the United Kingdom of Israel was divided into two distinct parts. The northern tribes, led by Jeroboam, rebelled against the southern kingdom, called Judah, which had as its first king Rehoboam, the son of Solomon. This political and religious division led to a period of instability and idolatry in both kingdoms. The successive kings of these kingdoms were often marked by their relationship with God, some seeking faithfulness to the Lord, and others straying into idolatry and disobedience to the 10 Commandments. The Babylonian exile, in which Jerusalem was destroyed and the people were taken captive, was considered a direct manifestation of the consequences of breaking this covenant. Disobedience to divine laws resulted in divine judgment, and the exile was a reflection of the warnings previously made by God. In this scenario of desolation and despair, Ezekiel was called by God to deliver messages of warning, consolation, and hope to the captive people. He prophesied for approximately 22 years, sharing symbolic visions and impactful discourses. Ezekiel played the crucial role of communicating divine will, revealing promises of restoration and the importance of repentance for reconciliation with God. The text of Ezekiel, chapter 37, verses 1 to 10, is a powerful narrative that describes a supernatural vision that the prophet Ezekiel had. He recounts how the hand of the Lord guided him in spirit to a valley full of dry bones. This valley represented a scene of desolation and death, symbolizing the desperate condition of the people of Israel during the Babylonian exile. As he walked through the valley, Ezekiel noticed that the bones were numerous and completely dry, indicating that these people had been dead for a long time. Then God asked Ezekiel the crucial question, "Son of man, can these bones live?" Ezekiel responded with a statement of deep faith, "Sovereign Lord, you alone know." This response not only acknowledges God's sovereignty, but also expresses implicit trust in his power over life and death. Ezekiel's faith is evident in his willingness to accept the apparent impossibility of the situation and trust in God's ability to accomplish the extraordinary. His response reflects faith that transcends visible circumstances and is based on the certainty of God's omnipotence. Faith is the catalyst that triggers divine intervention, and the vision of the Valley of Dry Bones vividly illustrates how faith can transform seemingly hopeless situations. In the Christian life, experiences of revival are intrinsically linked to robust faith that trusts in God's ability to bring life to what seems dead. God then gives a specific instruction to Ezekiel to prophesy over these dry bones and proclaim the word of the Lord. The divine command aims to bring life to what seems completely hopeless. Ezekiel's prophetic word is directed to the dry bones, calling them to hear the word of the Lord. The divine response is presented in the sequence where God himself speaks to the dry bones through the prophet. He declares that he will bring life to these bones by putting the Spirit in them. Here, the term Spirit refers to the divine breath of life, the vitality that comes from God. Ezekiel's willingness to follow divine instructions, even when he did not fully understand the purpose or the final outcome, is a demonstration of humility, highlighting trust and submission to God. The narrative continues by describing how the bones come together, receive tendons, muscles, and skin, forming complete bodies. However, even after this physical restoration, the bodies were still lifeless. God then instructs Ezekiel to prophesy over the wind, symbolizing the Spirit of God, to bring the breath of life. The result is remarkable, as the bodies receive the Spirit, rise as a great army, and are revived. The Valley of Dry Bones in Ezekiel's vision carries profound symbolic significance, representing the desolate and spiritually dead condition of the people of Israel during the Babylonian exile. This valley, full of dry bones, is not just a geographic setting, but a vivid image of hopelessness, desolation, and estrangement from God that characterized the nation. The dry bones, as symbolic elements, illustrate the life that was lost. These bones represent the people of Israel in their spiritually dead condition, marked by disobedience to the covenant established with God. The image of dry bones evokes a sense of abandonment, despair, and absence of life, highlighting the urgent need for divine intervention. The exile, a direct result of this disobedience, led the nation to a state of desolation, where spiritual vitality was absent. The valley, generally associated with death and disregard, is chosen as the appropriate setting for this vision, emphasizing the severity of Israel's spiritual condition. The emergence of tendons, muscles, and skin indicates a complete physical restoration. This represents not only spiritual revitalization, but also the reconstruction of the nation of Israel as a whole. God promises to gather his dispersed people, rebuild what was destroyed, and restore the nation's integrity. This vision is deeply symbolic and has implications both for the historical context of the exile and for God's promises of spiritual restoration. It represents God's ability to bring life to what is dead, to restore hope even in the most challenging situations, and to spiritually revive the nation of Israel. The transcendent message is God's promise to transform desolation into renewal and to bring life to those who are spiritually dead. In the face of this challenging scenario, God made an extraordinary promise of restoration, recorded in verses 5 to 6. A crucial part of this promise is the return of the people of Israel to their own land. God declares that he will bring them out of the grave, symbolizing the return from Babylonian exile. This promise aligns with previous promises made to Abraham and his descendants of a promised land. It is a testament to God's faithfulness in fulfilling his promises despite the people's transgressions. In the other part of the promise in this passage, God assures that after this restoration, the people will know that he is the Lord. This implies a renewed acknowledgement of divine sovereignty, a deeper understanding of his authority, and a return to true worship. The transformative experience is not just physical and national, but also spiritual, bringing the people back to an intimate and reverent knowledge of God. The period of Babylonian captivity was also marked by a process of spiritual purification. Far from their land and the temple, the people of Israel faced an opportunity for reflection and repentance. God, in his mercy, did not abandon his people even during exile. Through the prophets, he offered words of consolation, promises of restoration, and instructions to seek the peace of the city where they were exiled. The Babylonian exile became a season of spiritual revival. The people began to seek God more intensely, recognizing the need for repentance and the importance of the covenant with the Lord. This period of purification prepared the ground for the return to the Promised Land and the reconstruction of the temple after the decree of Cyrus, the Persian king. Restoration. The period of restoration marks a chapter characterized by the return of the people to the Promised Land, the reconstruction of the temple and the walls of Jerusalem, the teaching of the law, and a remarkable spiritual awakening. After decades of Babylonian captivity, the Persian king Cyrus issued a decree allowing the Jews to return to their homeland. Led by Zerubbabel, Ezra, and Nehemiah, the people began the journey back to the Promised Land. This return symbolized not only a physical movement, but also the beginning of a spiritual restoration. One of the first endeavors after the return of the people of Israel was the reconstruction of the temple in Jerusalem. Despite challenges and opposition, the temple was rebuilt under Zerubbabel's leadership, marking a spiritual revival and the re-establishment of religious practices. Additionally, Ezra, a priest and scribe, played a fundamental role in teaching and applying the law of Moses. He led a movement to restore understanding and practice of the law among the people. Ezra promoted the public reading of the law, encouraging repentance and spiritual renewal. The people, upon hearing the law, experienced a deep conviction of sin and sought God in repentance. This resulted in a spiritual renewal, with the people committing to obey and honor God. Nehemiah, in turn, led the reconstruction of Jerusalem's walls, providing protection and security to the city. Despite adversities, Nehemiah and the people persevered, completing the task in a remarkable example of cooperation and determination. Nehemiah's story unfolds in the book of Nehemiah, which is a direct continuation of the book of Ezra. These books present a joint account of the return of the Jewish exiles from Babylon and the subsequent reconstruction of Jerusalem, including the temple and its walls. The first mention of Nehemiah occurs when he served as the personal cupbearer to the Persian king, Artaxerxes. The period during which Nehemiah served as cupbearer is situated during the Persian domination, more precisely in the 5th century B.C. At that time, the Persian Empire exercised control over a vast territorial expanse that included the region of Judah and Jerusalem. The position of cupbearer was more than just a function of serving wine to the king. It was a position of trust and closeness to the monarch. As a cupbearer, Nehemiah was not only responsible for ensuring the quality and safety of the drinks served to the king, but also had the opportunity to be in close contact with him, becoming a trusted advisor. Nehemiah needed to be attentive to details, discreet, and develop a sensitivity to perceive subtle changes in the king's behavior. His proximity to the monarch provided Nehemiah with an intimate understanding of the challenges and complexities of governance, a valuable insight that would be crucial in his future endeavors. Additionally, the position of the king's cupbearer placed Nehemiah in contact with diplomatic issues, as the royal court was often the setting for negotiations and interactions with other peoples and leaders. This environment provided Nehemiah with practical education in political matters and leadership strategies. During this time, the Persian Empire allowed a certain degree of cultural and religious autonomy in its provinces, including Judah. During this period, after the death of Nebuchadnezzar, many Jews returned from Babylonian exile, as permitted by King Cyrus's edict. This return was associated with the process of rebuilding Jerusalem, including the temple and its walls, which had been destroyed. On a quiet day at the Persian court, where Nehemiah served his vital role as the King Artaxerxes' cupbearer, he received news that triggered a turning point in his life. A group of visitors from Judah arrived at the court, bringing alarming reports about the state of desolation and ruin that plagued Jerusalem, the city of his ancestors. This account is found in Nehemiah 1 verses 2 and 3, where Nehemiah inquires of the visitors who came from Judah about the situation in Jerusalem. I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that survived the exile and also about Jerusalem. They said to me, "Those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire." As Nehemiah listened to these words filled with sorrow and despair, a whirlwind of emotions invaded his heart. The city he loved, a symbol of his heritage and faith, was practically vanishing. The walls were destroyed, and the once majestic gates now lay in ruins. The news deeply impacted Nehemiah, making him confront the reality of the situation. Faced with this desolate panorama, Nehemiah did not succumb to despair, but found refuge in prayer. He sought the silence of his chamber, away from the curious eyes of the court, and prostrated himself before the God of his ancestors. His prayer was more than a lament. It was a cry for direction, wisdom, and divine intervention in light of Jerusalem's critical situation. Nehemiah acknowledged God's sovereignty over all things, and in humility confessed the sins of the people that contributed to the city's affliction. Nehemiah's prayer to God is found in Nehemiah chapter 1 verses 4 to 11, and it said, "I confess the sins we Israelites, including myself and my father's family, have committed against you. We have acted very wickedly toward you. We have not obeyed the commands, decrees, and laws you gave your servant Moses. Remember the instruction you gave your servant Moses, saying, 'If you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and obey my commands, then even if your exiled people are at the farthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. They are your servants and your people, whom you redeemed by your great strength and your mighty hand. Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of this your servant, and to the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. He was willing to be used as an instrument in God's hands for the city's restoration. Communion with God gave him clarity of purpose and the courage necessary to face the challenges ahead. Nehemiah did not stop at lamenting the situation, but driven by faith, began to make plans for the reconstruction of the walls and the restoration of Jerusalem's dignity. His desire to act and contribute to the city's restoration became undeniable, and an opportunity arose when, on a day like any other in the Persian court, King Artaxerxes noticed the melancholy on the face of his faithful cupbearer and asked, "Why does your face look so sad when you are not ill?" Nehemiah, a little frightened by the king's inquiry, replied, "May the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire?" When asked by Nehemiah about the cause of his sadness, the cupbearer did not hesitate to share the grim news about Jerusalem. Artaxerxes, moved by Nehemiah's sincerity and loyalty, listened attentively, perceiving the determination in his cupbearer's eyes. Then, curious, the king asked, "What is it you want?" Nehemiah, still afraid, offered a quick prayer to the God of heaven and then responded, "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my ancestors are buried so that I can rebuild it." In a surprising gesture, the king offered Nehemiah permission to travel to Jerusalem and lead the reconstruction efforts. This concession, beyond a formal authorization, was an act of trust and recognition of Nehemiah's capability. The king recognized the integrity and dedication of his cupbearer, seeing in him the right person to face the immense challenge of restoring Jerusalem's walls. Thus, Nehemiah set out for his homeland, carrying the responsibility of leading the reconstruction. If you enjoy this type of content, please click the like button and subscribe to the channel. This will help YouTube recommend more videos like this. And let's get into the video. Upon arriving in Jerusalem, he did not limit himself to observing the magnitude of the challenge in daylight. He understood the need for a thorough assessment of the walls and gates. In a strategic move, Nehemiah chose to inspect the walls during the night when the city was silent and curious eyes were closed in sleep. He mounted in secret and, accompanied by a few confidants, surveyed the city's contours. Nehemiah's nighttime inspection was more than a physical analysis of the walls. It was a symbolic act of commitment and courage. In the darkness of the night, he envisioned the breaches in the walls, the possibilities of restoration and renewal that awaited. It is worth noting that shortly after his arrival, Nehemiah encountered skepticism and hostility from some local leaders. They questioned his intentions and ridiculed the audacity of dreaming to rebuild what had been destroyed. However, Nehemiah's determination was not shaken. He was not swayed by discouraging words, but, with unwavering conviction, continued to inspire the inhabitants of Jerusalem to believe in the possibility of reconstruction. Nehemiah was not alone in this endeavor. Among the workers were skilled masons, carpenters, and artisans, each contributing their expertise to the reconstruction of different parts of the walls. Men and women, young and old, all were called to play a crucial role in this undertaking. The diversity of the team enriched the workforce and reflected Nehemiah's comprehensive commitment to involving the entire community in the reconstruction effort. Besides verbal opposition, Nehemiah also had to deal with physical threats and intrigues. Those who opposed the restoration of the walls conspired to undermine the leaders' efforts, launching plans aimed at destabilizing and discouraging the workers. During the reconstruction, there were attacks and sabotage. However, Nehemiah's tenacity shone even brighter in these challenging moments. He adopted security measures, organized defensive strategies, and placed guards night and day, remaining steadfast in his purpose, refusing to yield to fear or intimidation. Resources were scarce, logistical challenges were enormous, and the task itself seemed monumental. However, Nehemiah had equipped himself with permissions. Before departing, he requested letters of authorization from the king that would help him overcome difficulties. The Bible cites this passage as follows: "If it pleases the king, may I have letters to the governors of Trans-Euphrates, so that they will provide me safe conduct until I arrive in Judah. And may I have a letter to Asaph, keeper of the king's forest, so he will give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel by the temple and for the city wall, and for the residence I will occupy. And because the gracious hand of my God was on me, the king granted my requests. So I went to the governors of Trans-Euphrates and gave them the king's letters. The king had also sent army officers and cavalry with me." Nehemiah's return to Jerusalem marked not only the physical reconstruction of the walls, but also the beginning of a profound spiritual and social transformation in the community. With a holistic vision, Nehemiah called the community to the reading and study of the scriptures, recognizing that the spiritual foundation was as vital as the physical walls. His inspiring leadership led the people back to the fundamental principles of their faith, renewing their commitment to God. Nehemiah also undertook social reforms to address issues of injustice and inequality. He encountered a situation where the most vulnerable were being exploited through predatory loans. Some individuals were charging exorbitant interest, plunging others into unbearable debt. Nehemiah's response was immediate and decisive. He confronted those responsible for the abuses, publicly rebuking them and demanding that they return what they had wrongfully taken. His firm stance made it clear that exploitation would not be tolerated under his leadership. In addition to correcting specific abuses, Nehemiah implemented comprehensive social reforms to address these structural issues. His approach was a call for the restoration of social justice, reflecting his concern for the overall well-being of the community. Worshipping God became the core of daily life in Jerusalem. Nehemiah encouraged the observance of the Sabbath and religious festivals, reaffirming the importance of rest and celebration as expressions of gratitude and reverence to God. Furthermore, Nehemiah made efforts to strengthen spiritual leadership in the city. He appointed priests and Levites to leadership roles, ensuring that spiritual guidance was firmly established. The community's response to Nehemiah's reforms was remarkable. The people not only embraced the changes, but also wholeheartedly committed to the established principles. The community demonstrated renewed commitment to God, actively participating in rituals and ceremonies, seeking a life of righteousness and justice. Here, a reflection is warranted. From the beginning, Nehemiah did not view the mission as a mere human endeavor, but as a task guided by the divine hand. His immeasurable faith was not just an accessory, but the foundation upon which he built his vision and action. He acknowledged God's sovereignty over the challenges he faced, and this trust permeated every aspect of his decisions and leadership. Divine intervention became evident at various critical moments. When Nehemiah stood before King Artaxerxes, asking for permission to return to Jerusalem, God moved the monarch's heart, leading him to approve the departure. This concession was not just a political coincidence, it was a response to Nehemiah's faith and prayer. During the reconstruction, adversities and opposition were not simply overcome by human efforts, but also by God's supernatural intervention. The community, inspired by Nehemiah's leadership, faced challenges that seemed insurmountable. Divine protection was evident when external threats failed to halt the progress of the work. The final success in rebuilding the walls could not be attributed solely to human effort. It was clearly shaped by the divine intervention that accompanied every step. The work of Ezra and Nehemiah, along with the active involvement of the prophets, Haggai and Zechariah, contributed to spiritual restoration and reform in the community. The renewed dedication to serving God and the return to the covenant were fundamental to re-establishing the relationship between God and His people. The close of the Old Testament. The Old Testament concludes with the post-restoration prophets, including Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, who, through their messages, sought to guide the people of Israel on their spiritual journey. However, with the close of the Old Testament canon, the subsequent period is characterized by 400 years of apparent prophetic silence. During this interval, there is no record of new books being added to Scripture, and the voice of the prophets is not heard. This period of silence does not signify divine inactivity, but represents a time when God was preparing the stage for the fulfillment of His messianic promises. The anxious wait for a Messiah prophesied throughout the Old Testament created growing expectation among the people of Israel. The arrival of the New Testament, inaugurated by the birth of Jesus Christ in Bethlehem, marks the end of this period of silence. Christ, the promised Messiah, would bring the fulfillment of divine promises, redemption, and salvation for humanity.